Not every IRS letter puts you in danger, but a certified IRS letter usually means enforcement is about to begin. When that happens, the law gives you something called collection due process rights, CDP rights. And those rights exist for one reason, to give you a very short window of leverage before the IRS can legally move forward. Miss that window and the IRS doesn't send a reminder, they escalate. Let me walk you through what CDP rights are and why timing matters more than almost anything else in this process. Why IRS certified letters are different. The IRS sends a lot of mail. Most of it is informational, some of it is annoying, some of it is confusing, but only certain letters actually trigger enforcement. A certified IRS letter is different. This isn't the IRS asking for attention, it's the IRS starting the enforcement clock. Certified mail is typically used when the IRS intends to do one of two things. First, levy assets like your bank account, wages, or business receivables. Second, file a federal tax lien, which publicly attaches the IRS claims to your property and credit. They don't happen because an agent is mad. They happen because the IRS is following a procedural checklist. That's an important distinction. When people read a certified letter from the IRS, they often focus on tone. They ask, how serious does this sound? Or is this aggressive? That's the wrong question. The correct question is, what step of the enforcement process does this letter represent? Because this isn't the IRS asking for your attention. This is the IRS starting the enforcement clock. And that clock matters more than whatever language is used in the letter. What CDP rights actually do? Collection due process rights are not a loophole. They're not a favor. And they're definitely not forgiveness. They're a legal requirement placed on the IRS. Before the IRS can levy your assets or file certain liens, the law requires them to give you notice and an opportunity to be heard. That opportunity is your CDP window. When CDP rights are properly triggered and exercised, a few important things happen. First, enforced collection stops. That means no wage garnishment, no bank levy, no forced seizures. Second, the IRS is required to review your case before acting, not casually, formally. That review can include payment options, settlement structures, or challenges to how the IRS is proceeding. But here's the key distinction that most people miss. The CDP rights are about process and timing, not avoiding liability. They don't erase what you owe. They don't make the IRS go away. What they do is slow the machine down long enough for strategy to matter. Once the deadline passes, the IRS regains full enforcement authority. No pause, no extra notice, no reset. At that point, you're no longer dealing with planning, you're dealing with consequences. The CDP deadline is short, and it's absolute. In most cases, you have 30 days from the date on the notice to act. Not 30 business days, not when you're ready, 30 days. And here's why so many people miss it. They tell themselves things like, I need time to get organized. I'm not ready to deal with this yet. I'll open it later when I'm in a better headspace. Those reactions are human. They're understandable. But the IRS does not operate on emotional readiness. The enforcement process keeps moving whether you engage or not. And once that 30-day window closes, the IRS does not reissue CDP rights. There is no reminder, no follow-up warning, no second chance. What happens next is enforcement. That can mean wage garnishment, bank account levies, frozen business funds, disrupted payroll, public liens, often with no advance warning. People are shocked when this happens because they will assume the IRS will escalate gradually. In reality, the escalation already happened. The certified letter was the escalation. Real-world consequences of waiting. Most clients don't come to us during the CDP window. They come after enforcement starts. By then, the conversation changes. Instead of asking, what's the best way to handle this, we're answering, how do we stop the bleeding? Options narrow fast once enforcement begins. Payment terms become more rigid. Negotiation leverage weakens. Timing flexibility disappears. And most of the damage doesn't happen because the IRS is aggressive. It happens because the deadline was missed. Waiting doesn't preserve options. It quietly removes them. That's one of the hardest lessons people learn about IRS collection. Doing nothing doesn't keep things neutral. It shifts power and not in your favor, where legal strategy actually matters. This is where the difference between compliance and advocacy shows up. CDP rights are not paperwork. They're legal leverage. How they're handled affects your negotiation position, the timing of payments, your exposure to enforcement actions, and how much control you retain over the process. This is not the stage where generic advice helps. Once certified letters are involved, you're no longer just filing forms or reporting numbers. You're dealing with process rights and enforcement boundaries. That's attorney territory. And this is where many people make their second mistake. They act in time, but they act without strategy. They rush. They overshare. They agree too quickly. They give leverage right back. If you've received a certified IRS letter and you're not sure whether your CDP window is still open, that's not something you guess on. We offer a free call to help determine where you actually stand before enforcement escalates. You can book one using the link in the description. Why acting on time isn't enough. Here's the part that surprises people. Even when taxpayers act within the CDP window, many of them still lose leverage. Not because they missed the deadline, but because of how they responded once the window was open. CDP rights don't protect you automatically. They protect you only if they're used correctly. What I see all the time is someone who technically acted on time, but then they filed the request without understanding what issues should be raised. They gave the IRS more information than was required. They agreed to timelines that weren't necessary. They treated the hearing like a formality instead of a strategic checkpoint, and that matters. Because CDP is not just about stopping enforcement, it's about how much control you retain while enforcement is paused. If you walk into that process unprepared, the IRS doesn't need to levy you immediately until you've boxed yourself in. This is where people confuse cooperation with strategy. The IRS expects compliance. What they don't expect is disciplined resistance. They don't need your life story. They don't need explanations that aren't legally relevant. They don't need you to clear things up. They need a defensible position. And when taxpayers treat CDP like a conversation instead of a legal process, they give up leverage voluntarily, and the IRS is happy to accept it. Why this stage feels so confusing? Part of the problem is that CDP rights sit in an uncomfortable middle ground. It's not an audit. It's not yet full-blown collections, and it's not court. So people don't know how seriously to take it. They think, if this were really serious, someone would call me. Or, I'll just explain myself, this should resolve. That mindset comes from dealing with customer service problems, not enforcement agencies. The IRS isn't trying to understand your intent. They're evaluating risk and collectability. Every response you give them answers questions like, how organized is this taxpayer? How defensible is their position? How likely are they to push back? How much resistance will enforcement encounter? Those signals matter more than most people realize. Calm structure beats emotional urgency every time. And this is why timing and strategy are inseparable. Acting late removes leverage. Acting early without strategy wastes it. IRS certified letters are dangerous because of timing, not because of tone. Acting within that window doesn't solve the problem. It gives you leverage. And that's where most people still get hurt. Because even when they act in time, they respond the wrong way and give that leverage right back. In the next video, I'll break down the biggest IRS audit mistakes I see, the things people do that quietly expand cases, increase exposure, and turn manageable situations into expensive ones. I'll see you there.